Welcome back. This is chapter 3, and this is a quick review. Again, as I've said before, if you've already had your biology class, you have probably had most of this content, and it is going to seem like review for you. If you have not, then you are going to need to read this chapter carefully. I am going to hit some of the highlighted areas that I think you should pay attention to, and then we can discuss them in the office hours if you need more information or more assistance understanding. The title of the chapter is The New Genetics. I'm not quite sure what the title means. I don't know what's new about anything that's in this chapter. But nonetheless, if you think that this is somehow different genetics than you learned before, no, it is not. Let's start by talking out about what is the genetic code. We know that all living cells, every one of them, basically has DNA at the heart of the cell, and the DNA molecules are on chromosomes. You have, and each of us have, 23 sets of chromosomes, or 46 chromosomes. Half of all of those chromosomes come from the mother, and half of those chromosomes come from the father. The chromosomes are then organized into genes, and each of those genes basically sit on a very precise location of a chromosome. When that doesn't happen, that's when we can end up with problems. It is then when the cell of the male, the sperm, comes together with the ovum of the woman and they produce a zygote. If you want to think in pure numbers, there are about 21,000 coding genes that then make up a string of 20 amino acids. All of this then forms to combine the living organism, or us, and that is called the genome. So the entire package of instructions making up a living organism is the genome. What are genes and chromosomes? Chromosomes are one of the 46 molecules of DNA that come in 23 pairs that virtually every cell of the human body contains, and that together contain all the genes. Some species, other than humans, have more. Chimpanzees, I believe, have 48, and some have fewer. But the number of genes doesn't mean we're genetically more or less advanced. A gene is a small section of the chromosome. It's the basic unit of transmission of our heredity. A gene consists of a string of chemicals that provide instructions to the cell, and it tells them then to manufacture certain proteins. Most of us share the same genes. About 99% of all human genetic material is the same. It's that 1% that really makes the difference. But let's move a little beyond the genes. And think about some other questions, such as how does the environment alter genetic expression? And we know that the environment impacts how genes are expressed, but we need to think about that more carefully. For example, we know that many people are born with genetic tendencies for certain diseases, but those may not necessarily be expressed. A good example of this is diabetes. You may have a strong family history of diabetes. You may carry a gene that makes it more likely that you will have diabetes. But part of the impact is the environment. And your diet and your exercise could affect whether or not that gene is actually expressed. This is why we spend so much time in nursing emphasizing prevention. One of the other things that this leads to, knowing the impact of the environment, is the study of epigenetics, which is the study of how the environment alters genetic expression, beginning with conception and continuing throughout the lifespan. It is why many of the courses you will take in nursing actually look at the entire lifespan rather than a small section of it. We know things, for example, that the brain is developed partially, largely, before you're even born. And we know that the impact of the environment can impact brain formation. We know that once you're born, there are things in the environment that can impact how your brain functions. We saw one of those a few years ago when Flint, Michigan had the issue with the water and with lead in the water. Lead in the water has a serious impact on the development of brain development and functioning in children or in the fetus in utero. Again, it is really important to remember that there are individuals whose genetics indicate that they have a very high likelihood of a disease, yet they never show signs of that disease. And often that comes from environmental influences. And those environmental influences can be things that are toxins in the environment, but they can also be social. Sex chromosomes are always an interesting topic. Most of you have probably heard of Henry VIII and all of the wives whose heads he's chopped off because they kept not giving him a male heir. One of the interesting parts of what we know now that he didn't know is that had absolutely nothing to do with those women. So females always have two X chromosomes, and men have an X and a Y. It is the Y chromosome that carries the characteristics determining whether or not a baby is going to be born male. Because the woman only carries two X's, she has no control over the sex of an infant at birth. If on the 23rd pair of chromosomes, the X chromosome and one Y chromosome come together, it's referred to as XY. That is a male. If it comes together as an XX, so if it comes together with the X from the male and the X from the female, then it's female. Let me do this one more time. If you have a couple and they have a child, and the woman always donates an X chromosome because women have two X chromosomes. The man can donate either an X or a Y chromosome. So XX is female and an XY is male. Now, we would think that the result would be that you would have a 50-50 mix of male and female babies that are born, but that actually isn't quite accurate. There are about 120 male zygotes that are conceived for every 100 females. Now, it's believed that that's because the X chromosome is actually larger than the Y chromosome, so the Y is more efficient at getting to the ova first. But by the time that a woman gives birth, the ratio of male to female births is about 105 males to 100 females. But at every stage of life, the death rate then for males is higher than the death rate for females, which is why in our older age you see more older women than you see older men. An important thing for you as nursing students to understand is that for most of history, no one knew the sex of a baby until it was born. However, now people are able to basically determine the sex of the fetus, whether it's male or female, before it's born. And for people that do in vitro fertilization, they are even able to tell before the egg is implanted what the gender is going to be. This raises some very interesting ethical questions that must always be considered. There are cultures, and have historically been cultures, that preferred male children. We still see it today in many ways. And there are many people that will choose a male child over a female child. It's unfortunate, it is reality, but it is something that we need to always be aware of. This is to say that sex generally is assigned at birth. So I want you to understand the difference in the terms. And this is really important, especially for you to be sensitive and to understand when interacting with your patients. Sex, it generally means that sex that was assigned at birth, whether a person is born male or female. Gender refers to a social and a cultural construct. And it is not assigned at birth, and it can be interpreted in different ways depending on how the person perceives themselves. And then one of the important things, as I discussed a minute ago, is in vitro fertilization. And this is something that we need to have a lot of thought about, because you can end up with people choosing a gender. And while there are countries that do not allow you to do that, there are countries that do. One of the probably beauties of life or interesting things is twins. And you can have twins or triplets or quadruplets, but more often what you see is people will occasionally have twins. And while it isn't that common, it does happen. There are two types of twins. And this is also an important thing for you to understand. There are monozygotic twins. And monozygotic twins means that they come mono, one, from one zygote. If they come from one zygote, then that means they have the identical genetic material, because the one zygote, they split. So it split. So it is the exact same genetic material. That's how you end up with identical twins. It's important to remember that while their genes are the same, this is why the epigenetic influence is really important, because the moment they're conceived, they may have different influences that impact them. And certainly after birth, they are going to have many different environmental influences that impact things like behavior and growth and development. So remember, you start out with all the same genes, and they are going to be very much alike. They are going to look alike, probably sound alike, and have a lot of the same behaviors. But they may not be exactly alike because of the influence of the environment around them. The other type of twins is diazygotic, meaning two. And what happens is that two ova are fertilized by two different sperms. So two eggs and two sperm come together. They then do not share the exact same genetic material. And from that, you have what people once referred to as, and still do often, fraternal twins. Now, fraternal is obviously an inaccurate term because fraternal means brothers, and they may not be brothers. They may be sisters, or they may be a brother and a sister, or a brother and a brother. One day, our sexist language will catch up with us and hopefully change, and we will use terms that are appropriate. What we know is that as women get older, they are more likely to produce two eggs at a time. Usually a woman produces one egg per cycle. As you get older, you may throw out two or more eggs, and when that happens, it makes it more likely that then you will end up with twins. So to review, monozygotic twins come from one zygote. This results in identical twins. And diazygotic twins, there are two ova are fertilized by by two sperm, and this results in twins that are not identical. All right. For your amusement, I'm re-recording this slide because my cat stepped on the keyboard. So let's start this again. Dominant recessive heredity. Dominant refers to a relationship between two versions of a gene. If one is dominant, then the other must be not dominant. In that case, we call it recessive. A dominant gene or a dominant version of a gene is a particular variant of a gene, which for a variety of reasons expresses itself more strongly all by itself than any other version of the gene which the person is carrying, and in this case, the recessive. I would like you to really focus and learn this little image here, because it's going to help you remember dominant and recessive. If one of the eyes is the mom and one of the eyes is the dad, and they both have brown eyes, then the only way to get a blue-eyed baby is if they both carry a blue recessive gene. And so 25%, they have only a 25% chance of having a blue-eyed baby. But if one parent has blue eyes and one has brown, and the brown-eyed person also has a blue-eye recessive gene, then that increases the chance of the baby being born with blue eyes from 25% to 50%. We must always consider the impact of nature versus nurture on the expression of diseases or characteristics. And while we know that heredity plays a large part in the development of anyone, it isn't everything. There are conditions, for example, alcohol or substance use disorders, that we know is strongly linked to heredity. We know that if a parent suffers from this disorder, then there is an increased likelihood that the child will suffer for it. But we also know that there are things you can do, which is why in nursing we focus so much on prevention, that you can do to help prevent that. So if you have a child that you know is at risk, a decision the parents may want to make is to have no alcohol in the house until the child is an adult, to basically be able to teach them a life without alcohol and to make sure that they are of an age that they can make a reasoned decision about whether or not they want to take the risk or not. When I was a nursing student many, many years ago, I was doing my pediatric rotation, and there was a young person there that had cirrhosis of the liver and, short of getting a transplant, was going to die. And this person, it turns out, had cirrhosis of the liver because of alcoholism and many years of abusing alcohol. Of course, the parents had not realized what was going on until it was a major problem. And it was probably a combination of a genetic predisposition to alcoholism, a genetic predisposition to cirrhosis of the liver, and then environmental influences in a young life. We do have the ability to provide education and counseling to new parents, and this is something we'll discuss a little bit later. Another example is nearsightedness. We know that all babies are born very nearsighted. They see what's about 1 to 3 feet in front of them. As we get older, our vision changes and the shape of our eyes change, and by the time you reach puberty, you can see much better than you did as an infant, except for some unlucky few like me who never see quite well enough. But it does change. But the interesting part about this is there are things that actually influence eyesight. And they know that children need sunlight and they need to be outside. And eyesight is actually impacted in a very positive way by being outside every day. Heritability indicates how much a variation within a population in a specific error can be traced to heredity. A good example of this is height. In about 95% of height is related to heredity. How tall your mom and your dad were. And this is the thing, when there is good nutrition. But in times when people are malnourished, when a child is malnourished, then only about 80% of height is associated with heredity. And then there are some people like me that seem to have gotten all the recessive genes, so I ended up shorter with brown hair, whereas all my brothers are over 6 foot tall with blonde hair and blue eyes. So go figure, every once in a while, you get all the recessive genes coming together. One of the things I want you to pay very careful attention to, and you need to go back and read this in your book, is the different chromosomal and genetic problems. This is information in nursing you need to know. Some of this, you need to know it now, but some of this will show up on your in-class exam when you take it. So it's not information that you can forget. So we're supposed to have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs, but we don't always have 46. Sometimes they fail to duplicate or divide. And there are people that are born with both more and less than 46 chromosomes. Now, normally, if there is something wrong with the chromosomes, then the pregnancy does not progress. But that is not always the case. And usually, more often than not, if you're born with more or less than 46 pairs of chromosomes, then the child generally doesn't live very long after birth. But there are exceptions. So trisomies, basically instead of tri meaning three, instead of two pairs of chromosomes in an election, they may have three. Trisomy 21 is referred to as Down syndrome, and it has some very common characteristics: a thick tongue, a round face, slanted eyes, distinctive hands, feet, and fingerprints. They have a smaller brain, with the hippocampus being especially affected. This is one of the more common genetic abnormalities you're going to see in children. The 23rd pair of problems are the ones associated with gender. So Turner syndrome in girls, where the girls only have basically only one X. If you look at table 3.2, there are more examples of abnormalities in your book, and I highly recommend you learn those. This is something you're going to need throughout your education. So go to that page in your book, learn all of them, and try to commit them to memory. The last thing I wanted to talk to you about is genetic counseling. Genetic counseling is provided to expectant parents or new parents, especially if they know that there may be a problem. And it's not just with expectant new parents, but also there is now many forms of genetic testing. And anytime you have genetic testing, you need to have a trained genetic counselor do the counseling. Not just anybody, not just because you're a nurse, it does not qualify you to be a genetic counselor. Because you're a physician, that does not qualify you to be a genetic counselor. Genetic counselors are specifically trained, first of all, to be able to read and interpret the test, but also to know how and when to talk to people. There are two big rules. Tests are always confidential, and they are always beyond the reach of insurance companies and public records. And two, decisions are made by the clients, not the counselors. It is never, ever, ever our responsibility to make decisions for the patients on genetic abnormalities. We provide information. The genetic counselor provides the information available, but it is up to that person to make a decision for themselves. We're just here to help. I want you to go back and pay careful attention to this chapter. I provided several videos that explain some of this stuff in more details. So make sure to check out those videos for additional detail about different concepts.